Hi everyone, this is Ryan. I wanted to share some thoughts I've been having about connecting your mind to a computer. Before I begin, I think it's important that I have a disclaimer. Now, this is not clinical advice, so please don't go and act on this information. Make sure you work with your mental health provider. And this isn't yet research material. I've read some papers, but I haven't properly organized it or referenced it. Because of this, it may contain mistakes, even though I try my best to think and speak clearly and faithfully. What it really is speculative ideation that I hope to be able to research further in the future. That said, we can move on to the presentation. The agenda I'll follow. First, I'm briefly going to describe who I am. Secondly, I'm going to look at why we may want to connect our minds to a computer, specifically in the context of mental health. Then I look at one type of data, structural data. Then I look at functional data. Then I look at using this data to build a large brain model. And lastly, I touch on the philosophical and ethical implications of these ideas. So who am I? I have had a career in tech, in the technology space for about 20 years, both at big tech and startups. Before leaving the field 3 years ago, my last role was an AI specialist. So I became aware somewhat of AI and how it works. As stated 3 years ago, I pivoted to begin working in mental health. Right now I'm doing grad school and I'm working with a small set of clients and conducting personal research. Something I'm interested in is combining mental health and technology. Now, if you're familiar with mental health, you'll know how important the DSM or Diagnostic and Statistical Manual is. Currently in the field of mental health, diagnosis is done with this one big book. It has all the hundreds of diagnoses you could receive in mental health. An example I provide here is for generalized anxiety disorder, also known as GAD, which is your garden variety anxiety. So when you meet with a clinician because you feel like you have anxiety or symptoms of it, they'll probably use the DSM to guide giving you a diagnosis. Each diagnosis in the book has several pages summarizing the disorder, and importantly, a series of criteria that the clinician can use to diagnose. You can see here I have A, B, C, D, and E above. This is not exactly what the DSM says, I've paraphrased it, but for anxiety, a clinician will ask you something like, do you have excess worry? Is it difficult to control the worry? Is it causing you 3 or more of these following symptoms? Restlessness, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, you can read it. Is the worry significant? And they'll also check to see if your condition isn't caused by a medical diagnosis or a substance use condition. So if you meet the criteria, boom, you get diagnosed with anxiety. It's as simple as that. So whilst the DSM is so powerful and prevalent within the field, there is also criticism that it's a bit too simple and crude. When we compare medical diagnosis, there's much more that can be done, like tests, imaging that can be done with medical diagnosis. We can't do that today in mental health. Diagnosis in mental health are still done relatively manually and subjectively via the DSM. It's often the choice of diagnosis that really dictates the treatment. So if we decide you have anxiety or GAD, we might be led to offer certain treatments. In which case the treatment might be, say for example, you're diagnosed with anxiety, therefore you get talk therapy, some empathy of course, CBT and mindfulness. Success in therapy for long-lasting and deeper change often needs a more nuanced view than this. And there are actually changes in the industry that are happening to allow it. So the question I ask is, how do we improve mental health diagnosis and intervention? One effort looking to rethink mental health is research into P factor or psychopathology factor. Just like an IQ could measure your intelligence, the P factor tries to give you a score to tell you how much psychological stress or psychopathology you have received. The idea here is that instead of subjective questionnaires for every different mental illness, what if there is actually commonality between all mental illnesses that can be measured? In medicine, cancer and heart disease are clearly different and different fields, but in mental health, we now know that mental illnesses are not that different. In fact, if someone is mentally ill, there's a 50% chance, I believe, they will have multiple mental illnesses. This is known as comorbidity. And if we consider subclinical levels of presentation, that is, say, anxiety that exists but it's below the diagnosable threshold, then probably the odds are of higher comorbidity still. The P factor then says, what if there was a single score that could measure all mental illness? Importantly, when we think like this, we can begin to realize that people just don't get a mental illness. Typically, they will experience developmental trauma. This developmental trauma will increase psychological stress, which increases the psychopathology factor or P factor. P factor research suggests that psychological stress is expressed in one of three main ways: internalizing, externalizing, and thought disorder. For internalizing, you blame yourself, and that's such as depression or anxiety. For externalizing, you may act differently in society, such as ADHD or breaking the law or substance use. Thirdly, thought disorder, you kind of lose touch with reality as a way to cope. So depending on the person and their specific situation, developmental trauma expresses itself in mental illness, usually multiple mental illnesses. Let me try and illustrate this via an example. In this example, say you meet a person who is depressed, worried, and frightened. The idea would be that they must have experienced developmental trauma, in this case, which expressed itself mainly as internalizing, manifesting in symptoms of depression, anxiety, and OCD. This is not a scientific diagram, but instead it's an attempt to communicate this idea. In this example, say you meet a person who is impulsive, irritable, and extravagant. The idea would be they may have experienced developmental trauma, in this case, which expressed itself mainly as externalizing, manifesting in symptoms of ADHD, conduct disorder, substance use, narcissism, but also some anxiety and psychosis. Once again, this is not a scientific diagram, but instead an attempt to communicate an idea. In this example, say you meet a person who is paranoid, isolated, and nervous. The idea would be that they must have experienced developmental trauma, in this case, which expressed itself mainly as thought disorder, manifesting in symptoms of psychosis and paranoia, but also symptoms of anxiety and OCD. Once again, not a scientific diagram, but an attempt to communicate an idea. So, when we move from a classification system like the DSM to a developmental trauma and expression type system, as seen in the P factor research, it changes fundamentally the nature of mental health care. Instead of asking what is wrong with you so we can understand your diagnosis, we can ask what happened to you so we can understand your developmental trauma and the expression of that trauma as psychopathology and then mental health symptoms. Once we clearly know what happened to our client and how their symptoms express, we can begin to move to a more advanced type of conceptualization. Process-based therapy is an approach that works well with this P factor idea. Process-based therapy cares less about your diagnosis, say it was anxiety, but instead looks at the processes that are causing your symptoms. In doing this, we move from generalized mental health care to more personalized mental health care. Here's an example I have of a dynamical network analysis, which is a tool within PBT. In this diagram, we aren't treating anxiety. Instead, we've listed symptoms below, such as runny nose, tight muscles, social nervousness, insomnia, and worry. All of these are symptoms of anxiety, by the way, including the somatic ones, even the runny nose. We then learn more about the client's life. Here we have a family system with trauma, a work system imposing trauma, a belief system that longs for creativity and authenticity, feelings of resentment and exhaustion, avoidance of true desires, and grieving for their lost youth. From this, we learn that what needs to be treated is actually a core schema of shame and attachment trauma. After building this understanding, we would treat the client with a very different approach than if we just diagnosed anxiety with the DSM. We can now move on to much more personalized intervention offerings. For this client, we could start by reducing their fear and threat systems. This means by making them feel very safe and comfortable within our relationship. And we can do psychoeducation for this, as well as practicing calming skills and mindfulness. We then work to address the core shame at the center of the system. This can be done by compassion-focused work and cognitive reframing. We then work on more behavioral aspects, modifying people-pleasing and avoidance. and with assertiveness exercises and exposure therapy. Finally, we allow the client to reconnect with their authentic selves, which includes value-based exercises. As the field of mental health shifts from classification of illness with the DSM model to more personalized models with the psychopathology factor and process-based therapy, well, then things change. While this new paradigm offers more hope, it also takes more effort to deliver these types of personalized therapy and more skill on behalf of the clinician. My core question is then, in the age of data and AI, how can we make this easier? How could we say, automatically measure p-factor? How can we build personalized interventions with technology assistance? Well, today we're using data and AI in mental health already, and this is being done in 5 main ways. The first is linguistic analysis. If you're getting mental health advice from ChatGPT today, you're already doing this. Linguistic analysis is AI reading words being said and offering words back as information. The second is speech acoustic analysis. This is listening to the actual audio parts of voice, such as inflections, volume, tone, silence. All this can convey additional meaning. The third is video analysis. This is using AI on video to look at, say, facial expressions or eye movement, maybe detect emotions or even incongruence and lying. Fourthly is physiological data. This may be the Fitbit or Apple Watch you are wearing. It collects heart rate or skin conductivity measures, which measure stress, anxiety, and excitement. Finally, there is neurophysiological data. And this is connecting directly to data in your brain. I'll talk more about this. Neurophysiological data is what I am personally interested in. So all the other sorts of data is really nice, but for me, the holy grail is connecting directly to your brain. Everything else is just a proxy of brain data. But the issue is the brain is the most complicated thing known to mankind. Also, humans are alive, so how do I actually get in there and get access to that brain data? The first part of this question, the complexity of the brain, I'll address now. The brain has 86 billion neurons. Each neuron has 1,000 to 10,000 synapses. This gives us hundreds of trillions of total connections. Each of these connections can be firing between 1 and 200 times per second. If we were to take a picture of your brain at the neuron level, just at one point in time, using an electron microscope, it would require the same amount of space to store as the entire internet today. So that's a very, very, very large picture. The good news is that we do not need a full picture of your brain. We can actually turn the smaller pictures into structured data, such as a compressed graph. As a compressed graph, we can store a snapshot of brain data in, say, a few racks in a data center. As I mentioned, I used to work in technology. I have been in data centers, and on the lower right here is a picture of what a data center could look like. The vertical boxes with the glass doors are called racks. Inside each rack is about 20 to 40 servers, the horizontal slots that you see in there. When storing the brain, we don't want a snapshot at a point in time though. We'd like to see brain activity over time. In order to capture at the right level of detail, we might need to have 1 millisecond time resolution. That is taking 1,000 snapshots a second of the brain. If we stored 1 hour of brain recording, we would need an entire data center, which is like about the size of a football field of computers. However, if we reduce the level of measurement to just the neurons and not the synapses, we can make it smaller. So 1 hour of brain recording could fit in around 1 rack, which is about 20 to 40 servers. I hope this illustrates just how big the brain is from a data perspective, but also since technology is developing quickly, we do have solutions now for storage. So when looking at brain data, there are 2 main kinds. There's structural brain data, which is like making a map of the entire brain at one point in time. Then there's functional brain data, which is not just looking at the map of the brain, but it's looking at how neurons fire over that map over time, like traffic on a road map. The first effort I'm going to talk about is the structural brain data. And in the world of structural brain data, the effort to map the entire structure of an organism is known as the Connectome project. Similar to how DNA was mapped with the Human Genome Project, researchers today are trying to map all the neurons in the human brain in the Human Connectome Project. Many different organisms are also being mapped. The first connectome map was completed was a little worm called C. elegans, which has 300 neurons. This was done in 1986. Since then, we've successfully mapped a fruit fly, the Drosophila, in 2024, which has 120 to 140,000 neurons. We are working on a larval zebrafish with speculated completion between 2030 and 2035. It has between 300,000 and 1 million neurons. Then we move on to the mouse, which has 70 to 100 million neurons, which is speculated to be completed by 2045 to 2055. Finally, the human brain, which is much larger than the others, at 86 billion neurons. It's currently incomplete, of course, with some folks speculating that we'll achieve this between 2070 and 2100. Others say much farther than that. The method of mapping a connectome is done using an electron microscope. This is a picture of an electron microscope to the right. In order to get connectome data out of the brain, in order to get connectome data, a brain is removed from the organism. So it needs to be dead, and the brain is sliced up into nanometer wafers and put under the electron microscope. From here, each single neuron is identified and mapped and traced. This is traditionally done by hand. However, with recent advances in AI, we have AI-assisted techniques that can help speed things up. Even with AI assistance, it is very time-consuming and expensive to trace each individual neuron. So I've been discussing structural brain data within the connectome, the map of the brain, but what about functional data? As mentioned, functional data looks not just at the map of the brain, but the firing of neurons as they move across the brain. There are three main non-invasive methods that I'm going to present here. The first is fMRI. You may be familiar with fMRI, the F at the front referring to functional. The MRI uses magnetic fields to read changes in blood oxygen levels in the brain. The fMRI has pretty good spatial resolution, and whilst it doesn't see down to the neuron level, it can see down to the voxel level. A voxel is about 1 to 3 millimeters cubed. Each voxel represents about 100,000 to 1 million neurons. The fMRI is also slow, and data it receives is delayed, usually by a few seconds. And the fMRI is also expensive to use. The amount of tests you can do in an fMRI are limited because you are strapped into this machine. The second non-invasive way to get functional data is the EEG. The EEG puts little microphones on the surface of your scalp and can measure electrical activity in the brain. It can only measure the top areas of your brain, not the interior structures. EEGs have poor spatial resolution, and they can see activity at the centimeter scale of resolution, but it does have excellent temporal resolution, so it responds in near real time. The EEG is also relatively cheap and portable, and we can conduct exercises whilst the person wears the EEG. A newer technology is called fNIRS. fNIRS is known as a kind of portable MRI. It also measures blood oxygen changes in the brain, but it uses near-infrared light. It has a similar spatial resolution to EEG, although slightly slower temporal resolution. fNIRS is portable and also relatively inexpensive. The final category of functional data is invasive brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs. BCIs are implanted into your brain with surgery. For my research purposes, I'm less interested in BCIs right now. One, because they require surgery, fewer people have access to them, so less applicable to generalized mental health. Two, BCIs tend to focus on a very specific brain area. In the case of Neuralink, a few thousand neurons, BrainGate, a few couple 100,000 neurons, and deep brain stimulation, a couple 100,000 neurons as well. Sorry, BrainGate was a couple 100 neurons. Mental health I am researching may require datasets that are broader instead of specific, like these BCIs. However, I want to mention these as they could be a very important area of growth in the future and something worth watching. So having considered the data we have available today, we do not yet have anywhere near full human connectome data. And data from fMRI, EEG, and fNIRS is low resolution and partial. So how is it we can learn anything from this data? Well, even though we don't have full data today, there are some things that could be possible. When we look at AI large language models, they obviously don't have all the data in the world. That would be impossible to have all the data in the world. Large language models take a subset of data. terabyte to petabyte scale, and they build a model that acts like the world by allowing you to ask questions about almost anything. Now, what if we only need a subset of brain data, terabytes to petabytes, and we could use it to build a model that acted pretty much like a human brain? We could augment Connectome structural data with functional data from other sources, fMRI, EEG, fNIRS, and we could build a large brain model, or LBM, of your brain. It's not a replica emulation, but a simulation that has a degree of accuracy. So an LBM could predict, with a high degree of accuracy, which parts of a person's brain would be activated if presented with a certain stimulus. Just like your context window where you type into an LLM and you get a response from the model, an LBM would have an input and would give you an output. In this example on the slide, our input could be an activation of certain neurons in the brain regions listed, such as cochlear nucleus, for example. Our response would be telling us, potentially via a time series response, which neurons will be activated given a simulated input stimulus. To make this example more clear, imagine the neurons in the input are stimulating something such as a dog bark. The LBM would take that and show that for this person, this stimulus input would create an output that is, say, a nervous response or startle. There is one main challenge though. How do we know what each stimulus or output actually is? In the real world, we use language, a kind of dictionary, to offer shared meaning. So when I think of my cell phone, we all know the word phone, phone, as a label to indicate that object. The brain does not work this way. In every person's brain, a representation of a phone is completely different. You'll store phone as one neural representation, I will store it as another. So because of this, the brain is much more like encrypted data. Even if we can see it moving, we build a model of it, we still don't know what it really means. Before we can really make sense of our large brain model, we need a dictionary to unencrypt its meaning. And this is done by labeling. What I have here on the left is a picture of a combined unit that is EEG and fNIRS in one headset. The person also has a virtual reality headset on. Now, in order to build this brain dictionary, we need somehow to label your brain data with meaningful names. One way to do this would be to present a stimulus in VR and track the brain's response. For the case of the dog barking, we could present a dog barking in VR, our software knows it's a dog, and then we see how your brain responds to dog and save that in our dictionary. In this way, we could start building an understanding not just of brain activity, but what that brain activity actually means. As technology advances, this labeling may be built into products we use every day. On the slide to the right, in the lower right, I have a picture of these NextSense headphones. These are like your earbuds that play music, but they have built-in EEG. So potentially could label your thoughts as you're wearing them. I also have a picture of Meta Ray-Ban glasses. These have a camera in them, so you could see your surroundings and do image recognition. The two of these devices working together could, at scale, build out labeling for large brain models. Now, this may seem like more science fiction. I speculate these types of approaches won't be out for another 10 to 20 years. So you might ask the question, where do we even start today? Well, in the face of all this speculative and futuristic information, the good news is that there are things we can start doing today. There are real-world areas that are being researched today where data and AI can help in mental health. One of the most interesting places that I've been reading about is using AI for diagnosis with EEG data. I have screenshots from some papers I was reviewing, and these are studies using EEG data and putting it into an AI model, and it can actually assist in diagnosing mental illness. Everything from depression to schizophrenia to bipolar, OCD, ADHD, autism, anxiety, and more. Now, I've not found labs available for patients today that offer these services, only research. So if you know of any, let me know. However, there is a lot of research on this topic. It seems that AI models from EEG data can offer high accuracy in assisting diagnosis from 85 to 95% or more. This could be a very interesting area to begin combining mental health with technology. But ultimately, if you want to get even more science fiction, one day I wonder if each of us will have a model of our entire brain, an LBM, stored in the cloud. We could then connect a large language model to the LBM. This way we could use natural language to query our own mind, conscious and unconscious. I think this is a wild idea. After this, a next step would be neuromodulation, which is not simply reading from one's mind, but directly writing to someone's mind. It's not even feasible to my imagination how we do this today. However, in the realm of science fiction, we can consider the concept of uploading knowledge directly into people's brains a very exciting idea that I think is worth keeping track of. So the world of mental health is changing, and especially with advances in AI and data, I see many opportunities that await us. However, these changes may also bring challenges with them, especially in the realm of ethics. If we can connect minds to computers, then questions come up. Who decides what a healthy mind looks like? When does neurophysiological data become surveillance? Who is to blame when an AI system makes an error using your mind data? And if we do create an LBM, a full mind in the cloud, or your mind in the cloud, what human rights does it have? Anyway, this is the end of my presentation. I want to thank you for watching. Please feel free to comment on any ideas, especially ones that can help me learn more about these topics. Thanks again. Bye.